This session is called What Needs to Change, which sounds faintly threatening. I think there are three real reasons why things might need to change. One is that something's wrong, and we can all think of examples of that perhaps. Another is that the world has changed, and so we need to change too. And a third might be that all institutions need fresh air. You need oxygen entering the bloodstream. And in the course of the conversation... What was that? Is that a cry of pain? Can you not hear me? Do you disagree with something I've said already? Anyway, those are just a couple of thoughts into which we might possibly organise this session. But I have very little hope of organising this session because we have an absolutely marvellous panel of speakers who all come from completely different parts of the universe. I have a faint indication from each of them what they're likely to say. I don't think their remarks fit together at the moment at all. So this may be a very exciting or very incoherent session. I look forward to it enormously. Our speakers are Candace Allen, who is an author, a filmmaker, and though she lives here, she is secretly American, so she counts as an international perspective. Ivan Lewis, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, who promises that if he gets to make one political point, he will then turn into a human being. John Knell, who knows everything there is to know about arts funding and has been unbelievably cleverly condensing everybody's conversation throughout the day and has presented us all with an amazing piece of paper which has the key points of everything anyone has said all day long. So if we seem to have a good memory, that's why. Jonathan Mills, who is director of the Edinburgh International Festival and a great thinker about the arts and a marvellous festival director. And Mark Wallinger, one of my favourite artists in the world. So I feel greatly privileged to be sitting here, and I look forward very much to the conversation. Jonathan, would you like to start? What I'm going to do is ask each of the speakers to speak for 2, 3, 4 minutes,
yes.
And then we'll open the discussion. If they've all said different things, we'll have a completely incoherent discussion. If they've said something coherent, it'll be different. But we'll see. Jonathan, will you start us off, please?
Thank you. If I'm asked about what I think needs to change, I think it's the way we choose to describe ourselves and the territory we inhabit. I think that really needs to change. I think we've been seduced into accepting a frame of reference, a set of measurements that are entirely inappropriate for the arts. And not just for the arts, and I think as we've seen as this conversation has emerged, for certainly other parts that are of huge importance to the arts, such as education. And we're doing this at a time when neuroscience tells us in increasingly precise terms a lot more about our human capacity, our most basic human capacity. So I'm searching for some ideas which place the arts within a very central position of an evolving conversation about what we know about each other at a most basic level, about what we know about our cognitive function, about our brains, about the way in which we consider, the way in which we measure human intelligence. Because surely that has to have a profound influence on the institutions we develop, the relationships that we think about, and the transactions, either direct or indirect, that artists participate in. So I think it's extremely important for us to acknowledge that, in fact, it's not a single kind of intelligence that will be important into the world in which we inhabit, not a 19th century view of logical or linguistic intelligence, but an idea of multiple intelligences. And actually, if one starts to think about multiple intelligence, spatial, kinesthetic, musical, intrapersonal, interpersonal intelligence, then actually the whole game changes. And the whole question of how we measure and value what we do suddenly becomes much more interesting and much more contested. I read a book recently called The Master and His Emissary The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, in which a very respected literary scholar and psychiatrist actually describes the human brain and the difference and the integration between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Starkly, he says that we can actually function using one hemisphere alone, but it would be a very weird individual and an incredibly bizarre society that allowed itself to function exclusively on that kind of paradigm. I'm suggesting that we're in danger of doing exactly that, and that the measurements that we are accepting as part of this broad sense of how we measure ourselves contribute to that. At the times in human history when there has been a greater level of equilibrium, it's not just the arts and the sciences working together, but as neuroscience actually tells us, and neuroscientists are suggesting as they discover more about the brain, it's actually the integration of cerebral function. And so I think we need to go back to first principles about how we consider measuring, valuing, and describing what it is we do. Because it's a much bigger and much more complex set of equations than we are being allowed to express as part of public policy and as part of our actions.
Crumbs, that was pretty good value for 3 minutes. Kinesthetic intelligence already, and we're only at the first speaker. I did ask my fellow panellists here if they would kindly desist from talking about money, except incidentally, because I think we've had a lot about money, we've thought about money, there's no point in going on moaning about how there's not enough money. But, and Mark said to me, I was going to talk about money. So I said, well, too bad, you want to talk about something else. And he very kindly tore up his notes and started again. So, Mark, would you be next, please?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about collaboration and innovation and relevance today. I have trouble with the term relevance. In terms of a socket, a plug is relevant. I think it might be more useful to talk about culture as a whole and how we can create a public civic realm where we are civilised, where we can speak out, debate openly. That is culture. And I was lucky enough 3 or 4 years ago to be involved in 2 projects at the same time that in a way demonstrated the possibilities of 2 different kind of principles of arts funding and how art can be made. And one was what led to State Britain being made at the Tate Gallery. The Tate approached me because the Devine galleries were suddenly going to be empty in 7 months in advance, and suddenly they needed an artist to come up with an idea, and they approached me and a couple of other artists, and after a little while the penny dropped, and I'd been photographing Brian Hall's protest in Parliament Square for some while, and then there became an extra urgency in that there were new provisions for the police to be able to take his whole protest away. And so I took Judith Nesbitt and Clary Wallace down to the square on Monday the 23rd of May 2006, proposed that we remade the whole of Brian's protest, and that very night 72 police came and took it all away. So the museum suddenly became the only place, the only arena in which one could see this protest that was denied to the rest of us. And the protest kind of carried on by proxy at the Tate Britain for 7.5 months. At the same time, I made a sort of work for the sculpture project in Munster, which has been run by Caspar Koenig for the last 30 years. It's once every 10 years, but such is his relationship with the town and the community there that it becomes a quite glorious kind of opportunity and playground and arena for experiment for artists. And I decided that I should play God or authority, and erected a kind of eruv, a circular zone around the middle of the town, which a thread travelled for 3 kilometres around this zone, and such was the relationship there that when Casper asked me where I wanted this to be, I said, well, it'll be a circle about this big, and he threw me a saucer in this cafe, and I drew around it, and half an hour later the town surveyor was saying, so you want it 4.5 metres high and the same level above sea level all the way around? I said, yeah, okay, that's good. So, so one was a model that was a kind of reactive model, and the other was a generative model, and they both were able, because of context, because of friction, contingency, chance, opportunity, fleetness of response, and incredible support, plus the courage to take a chance with an artist, able to achieve things that no artist could sit in the studio and generate on their own.
Thank you. And that just illustrates so perfectly how unbelievably versatile artists have to be if they really want to engage with different administrations and publics around the world. We have very different systems, and that's a beautiful example. Thank you, Mark. Next, Ivan Lewis, who is a Member of Parliament for Bury South, has been since 1997. I'm not going to recite the rest of your career, but it's glittering. Ivan.
Thank you very much. I'll try and get the balance right between being a politician and a human being. I think the audience are probably best to make a judgment about that. But I'd like to start by genuinely saying I'm new to this world of art and culture. I was a minister in the Department for Education and Health, and the Treasury, and the Department for Development, and the Foreign Office. I'd just like to say the sector has been incredibly kind and open and generous in presenting me with opportunities to experience the wonders of the sector, but also to face me with some of the really tough choices that people are having to make right now, and some of their anxieties about the future. I want to talk a little bit about the current and the present in terms of the cut situation, but I want to talk more than that about the future and how we move forward. I think the first thing to say is that arts organisations can't be immune from cuts in a situation where difficult choices have to be made about deficit reduction. But the cuts that are being presented as we meet here today, in my view, are disproportionate. If you look at the combination of Arts Council, local government, schools, higher education, those cuts coming together are entirely disproportionate. And it is as though the Department for Culture, Media and Sport have not just had to make choices about the Arts Council. In my view, they should have also been advocates and champions in terms of some of the decisions that are being made elsewhere in the public sector. They're going to have a massive disproportionate impact on the world of arts. I also don't think anywhere in the calculations that have been made has any account been taken really of two things. First of all, the tremendous contribution that art and culture has made in terms of commercial success in this country, jobs and growth, but also the contribution that arts and culture makes to a better society, better quality of life, a stronger and civilised country. I don't believe any impact in these decisions that have been made has been measured in terms of that. I also think it's fair to say that before the election, people in the sector were promised something different and promised something new. You were told that there was going to be a new golden age. It was not going to be a return to the 1980s and 90s. But actually, ministers who were going to serve in the new government were passionate and believed strongly that art and culture should not be put through the dreadful cuts that they faced during that era. And I don't believe those pre-election commitments have in any way been honoured. And I'm slightly concerned that at a national level, there hasn't been a sufficiently strong national voice from people saying this is not acceptable. And I think that is something that is worth reflecting on. I also think that in the difficult times that lie ahead, there ought to be a new covenant between those organisations that, frankly, are going to suffer the least as a consequence of cuts over the next few years, and those organisations that are going to be the biggest losers. I think the values that underpin the art and culture sectors in this country would mean that that new covenant would be a logical extension of those values, that the strong should see it as their responsibility to help the weak. Now, this is not about an argument about protecting organisations that aren't of good quality or organisations that aren't efficient. but it is saying that there are many organisations, due to their location in the country, due to the fact that they don't have a strong voice around the public policy table, due to the fact that they work in disadvantaged communities or with minority communities, that will be disproportionately hit by these cuts. And it seems to me that the larger, stronger organisations have a responsibility to find ways of supporting those organisations through this difficult period. And finally, beyond the immediate to the future, I think we've got to face up to something which is very difficult to face up to. And that is that there has been a good decade on the whole in terms of public investment in the arts and culture. But during that decade, did we use that as an opportunity to sufficiently win the argument for arts alongside education, alongside health, alongside policing, in terms of what are public priorities? And I think we could argue that we haven't used that period of growth and massive success and massive creativity to think about how we can win that argument, and we need to think about that going future. There will always be a debate which puts intrinsic and instrumental together and asks people to choose between the two. My argument would be that actually, in a modern world, of course you have to demonstrate through evidence the impact and the benefits of the work that you do, whatever you do. The question is, what are appropriate measures? And those measures should not just be about the economic benefit of art and culture. They should also be about, as I've said, the benefits with regard to quality of life, happiness, well-being, equality and community cohesion. So we need to think about how do we as a sector build an evidence base which allows us to demonstrate in the future, when those decisions are being made about use of public resources, that you cannot marginalise art and culture. Art and culture is not only at the heart of our future economic success, it's also at the future of the kind of country that we want to live in. And the final point I would make is, I see it as my job to do two things. One is to be clearly an effective opposition and to hold the government to account and to be a strong voice for this sector. But I also see it as my job over time to develop inspirational and credible alternative vision and policies for the future, so that Labour is not just seen as an effective opposition, but Labour is seen once again as a credible alternative government. And I intend to work with the arts sector to ensure that as we develop that vision, you're part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I always allow all politicians to have two final points. I find it very, very helpful. Thank you very much, Anne. That was great. Candace, you're next.
Right. I think it's very interesting to be fresh and innovative on the final panel when people are beginning to hum the weary blues to themselves. But be that as it may, I think that one of the most fundamental elements of our problem is that regardless of all the evidence, the proselytizing, the testimony, the science and support, there is a deeply ingrained suspicion of the arts in this culture, as there is in the United States. There are a number of histories, treatments of why this is so. Barbara Ehrenreich's Dancing in the Street is a very good, accessible example of this. But I think that rather than railing about why don't people understand, why doesn't the government understand, et cetera, we have to understand that deep within this culture, this Anglo-Saxon culture with mixes, as it is in the United States, the arts, Jesse Helms in the United States, late and not lamented, said, when I hear the word art, I reach for my gun. In this country, what is the requirements for the English Bach, not including art, music, or culture, while the international Bach does, and those kids have to learn as much about language, arts, and science as the kids in the UK. What does that say? And what does the fact, I'm sorry, but in terms of the Labour government in particular, that the arts was not considered important enough that somebody who was really passionate, except for Chris Chris Smith. You know, somebody who was passionate about the arts and who lived it and wanted it to be all that they were, is assigned to look over the sector, you know. And I think so. How do you look at that? I'm trying to download. I download these papers. I'm trying to absorb them. Instead, I decided to watch flash mobs on YouTube, and I was just the joy in people's faces. Now, yes, flash mobs have been going on for a long time, but a lot of people over the age of 40, if they're in one, they're encountering one for the first time. And to see that, and to popular tunes, popular music, dance, this interaction, the folks who were experiencing this don't understand it as art. And part of the problem, I think, for art in terms of what we have to change is that, yes, in this room, we're saying that there is no division between high and low. The art, Allen says the Arts Council does not make a division between high and low. But out in the rank and file, people think that the arts are something over there. And although popular artists are called artists, painters, sculptors, folks who work in theaters, those are those other kind of artists, and they have nothing to do with me and what I care about, because what is popular, what is commercially acceptable, let alone successful, is disrespected by many of us in this room. And if we want to get the people behind what we do, we have to respect what brings them joy, to understand. There's a book called The Art's Instinct by Dennis Dutton. He has 12 requirements for art, and the very first one is direct pleasure. And for most people, particularly in these trying times, direct pleasure is their first priority when they want something outside to interact with them. And one more quick point is that often when people are trying to widen their audience, they will say, okay, you give us money and we'll let you watch a rehearsal. I think taking into consideration and not jeopardizing the mystery which is necessary for the creation of the artwork, it would help tremendously if artists brought people into their process so that people would understand that artists are people, who struggle, and that they're not going to be aggressive about somebody who doesn't really know what's going on, watching them do what they do, creating the process. More later.
Quite right. Absolutely wonderful. Very good. Now, John, your job is to sum up. No, it isn't. You can say whatever you like. It's your turn.
Liz, thank you. Although my comments have been partly shaped by... it was my task to go through all of your suggestions about the one thing you want to change in the arts and all the questions you wanted to be put to the panel. So I have seen that, and it has informed it. But look, the first change, I think, that we need to see, and I have to say today's conversations have really rammed this home to me, is that I think the arts need to recognise this as a turning point moment. I think the scale of the cuts are profound, particularly across local authorities, particularly in terms of the brutal cuts across higher education in terms of arts and humanities, and they are going to have an impact on the future supply line of creative and qualified people in the arts. And as a consequence, it's pretty clear to me, it's pretty clear from the conversations I've heard today, that the arts are going to have to work differently. You're going to have to find your own powerful answers to some of the challenges that have come up today, and I think you're going to have to look after yourselves a little bit better. And so my first point is you're going to have to turn the mixture, and there's been a mixture, I don't know whether you felt it, of anger, frustration and optimism, clearly evident across today's event, into some real action. So, to some action points. We need breakthroughs in terms of the place of the arts in our education system. It's clear, it's essential, it's been discussed a number of times, we can't say it enough. We need to take the everyone in great art for everyone more seriously, in terms of funding decisions and the expectations we place on our arts organisations, and obviously we say something about that in our provocation with Matthew. We need to continue to address some uncomfortable issues. For accepting, for example, that progress on the diversity issue is a living wage issue. One of the comments from one of the tables this morning, and I quote from one of you, was, "We must address the pay of artists and staff to break up the existing monoculture. Middle-class people who can afford the low remuneration." It's true. What are we going to do about it? Finally, we need a more collaborative and collegiate sector, less individualistic and competitive, more certain of its common goals and aims. And I do want to issue a few challenges here. This morning, I sense quite a lot of justification in the room about how the arts are already highly collaborative. I don't think they are. I mean, you know, hands up. Who really, really thinks the arts are super collaborative, brilliant at working with each other, not individualistic? Okay, well, there's not that many hands. And I want to verbally retweet a fabulous quote from Gavin Stride in the last session. It does actually deserve to be mentioned, which is that things in the arts have really changed, said Gavin. This is in the Big Society session. Under the last government, we were stabbing each other in the back. Under this government, we started to stab each other in the front. I think that captures what I feel very well. And why has it taken a funding crisis to spark serious talk of collaboration across the sector, both in terms of resources and in terms of collaboration? If I've had it said to me one time, I've had it said to me 15 times in the last 4 months, well, you know the one good thing about this recession, at least we might start having to have a serious conversation about collaboration. And what might that collaboration involve? Let's be clear about what some of those things would be. It would involve art organisations sharing audience data. It does mean we've had lots of conversation about what are the value of the arts today, what's their impact. As Diane Ragsdale has commentated, and she's been here and has facilitated the philanthropy session, it means the arts becoming more committed to measuring success, not by the number of arts organisations or paid seats, but by the collective impact of the arts as a whole. That's the game, that's what we should be caring about. It's about pooling their cultural education work. The Henley Review is about to drive this forward. Again, I challenge the sector. Arts organisations in localities should be coming together anyway to work through how to offer a coherent, unified cultural offer into our schools. What else would it mean? What else would this collaboration? Here's my action list. It would mean that the arts leaders of our biggest world-class art brands, and Nick Sirota's a trending name today, so I'd use him. It would mean Nick fronting up large-scale philanthropic fundraising campaigns for the whole sector. Some of you would have been in the philanthropy session and heard the wonderful Ed and his extraordinary We Did This initiative. It would mean major national arts brands, when he launches his fantastic national crowdfunding day, which will be soon, that they go and put their small projects asking for small amounts of money on that day, not because they want much money, because they'll bring all their followers to that crowdfunding activity, and then we might see lots of other arts organisations being funded. And finally, we need a good, public, transparent scrutiny and debate about the 50% infrastructure cut to the Arts Council and what it really means. It's very easy to make cuts, and we've heard lots of rationales today about why they're unavoidable. The test of the government is not the cuts. The test of the government is the degree to which they're going to try and evaluate and seek to ameliorate the consequences of the cuts. And it's pretty clear to me that a 50% infrastructure cut to the Arts Council means it is not going to be able to discharge its development role in the way it does now. So the sector's going to have to develop itself rather better. What will that mean, and how are you going to pull it off? I'm pretty clear. It certainly means that arts leaders are going to have to step up to the plate. They're going to have to play bigger roles in their sector and in civil society more broadly. And so I'm back to where I started. This is a turning point moment. What I take out of today is what active things we were going to do about it. Thank you.
Well, I promised you a diverse range of things to think about. Will you please start putting your hands up, and whoever's got the microphone, just give it to whoever's nearest them so we get fast. While you're just doing that, just let me remind you that from this very small panel of people, among the suggestions for what needs to change, we have had strong help the weak. The place of arts in education has to be subjected to a real new focus. We change the measurements of value. We think about left brain, right brain, and the instrumental, intrinsic measurements. That we allay suspicion about the arts. We have to respect flash mobs if we expect other people to respect Fassbinder, as it were. And the last point that John made is about how's the Arts Council going to manage a 50% cut. I don't want to start this conversation just talking about the Arts Council, but there is going to have to be a real change, and it's part of the collaboration story in the way the Arts Council relates to the arts world. We are going to have to work in collaboration with arts organisations who will be strategic partners of ours, who will do a lot of the tasks that historically the Arts Council did directly. So who's got the microphone? It's exciting. I don't know who it's going to be. Say who you are, and off you go.
Good afternoon. Stephen Chato, and it's Youth Music Theatre UK. And I'd like to pick up a discussion that Jonathan and I were having first thing this morning after Keynote. And in fact, Jonathan, my thoughts have developed further during the day, so I'd like to share a little bit of that. At that time, I was thinking, well, okay, we're cash poor at the moment, but in fact, the government organisations, Arts Council England, are networks and capability rich. And this could be made much more readily available to organisations of all types around this room. whether it's in the form of networking or methodology, templates. I mean, if Arts Council England is faced with such draconian cuts over the coming year, maybe there's a case for some transitional arrangements, if they can't be stopped, to make sure that the loss of capability and know-how is delivered out into receiving organisations such as the ones around this room. So I just offer that back to the panel for their thoughts.
Thanks. Let's have 2 or 3 contributions from the floor, and then we'll come back from the panel. Person at this table here, I can't see you, so there's a big light shining in my face, so if you're my best friend, please forgive me. Say who you are, please.
Hello, Peter Davis, Country City Council. It's a little bit based on the provocation papers and a little bit of stuff that's been building up in my mind over the day. It seems to me that there's a lot of talk about intrinsic value, instrumental value and stuff, but during times like this where money's tight and things are difficult, that actually it's potentially worth going back to probably more of an old school view of looking at the institutional value of what culture is, arts are, museums, heritage, all that type of thing. To me, the institutional value represents public value, and the public value represents a reputational value. And I think, in a sense, and I think this goes in the sense that there's probably not too many libraries in the room, but libraries have, on Twitter, there's the Save Libraries campaign, and in a sense, libraries are this institution. They're a thing which people feel that they value as the public, regardless of whether they use them or don't use them. It's something they feel is part of their life, of their infrastructure, of what makes them, or the place they live. It's part of where they live and who they are. Museums are starting to do it, the Museums Association, through things like Love Your Museum, Love Museums. It's all about what people feel is institutionally what they expect to be part of the UK, of part of England, part of the regions, the locale, the exact place, the moment in the place where they live. And it feels to me that it's possibly one of the things, the arguments that's missing. We talk about institutional, we talk instrumental, we talk about intrinsic, but these are sort of academic arguments that we have internally within the sort of culture realm, and actually it's possibly in terms of the public value and the public perceiving who we are as collectives, as collaborations and stuff, that actually there's this institutional value that we could really pull on to actually get the bulk of the public behind the idea that we're worth saving, we're worth actually taking forward, and we're worth letting us get on with the background work, which 90% of the public probably don't mind what we're doing so long as we're doing it and we're there to keep doing it.
Thank you. I hope the panel are choosing which of these questions they're going to want to answer, because we want them all answered in the end. Who's next? There you are. While you're close to the microphone, that's fine.
Good afternoon. I'm Evelyn Wilson from LCASE, which is the London Centre for Arts and Cultural Exchange. And my point builds really on the point for this gentleman over here who was talking really, as I understood it, really about the kinds of connections that perhaps also Arts Council itself perhaps can make at this point. You know, as we're being now urged, I think, to think in the spirit of collaboration much more, this is just a very, very practical suggestion, which is that earlier this morning, Ed Vasey talked about the need for the arts to engage more with organisations such as the Technology Strategy Board. We believe there might be something there, but it would be very interesting, I think, to know what is happening between Arts Council and Technology Strategy Board and the kinds of opportunities that presents here today to really foster the kinds of innovations and technological sort of innovations that have been spoken about. And also, not just the Technology Strategy Board, but it strikes me that there's another opportunity that isn't properly being grasped here, which I think is for Arts Council to be talking to the research councils as well, the AHRC, the ESRC, and other parts of the research environment, because, again, there are sort of disconnects here in spaces where there really ought to be opportunity, particularly at this point where we're all experiencing cuts in public funding. Thanks.
Thank you. Here, in the front. I will then look over that side of the room because I've been ignoring you.
Nicola Thorold, co-director of World Stages London, which is a collaboration of 7 London theatres. And my question is, we We've heard a lot about collaboration today, and it's becoming a buzzword. And I've been working on this collaboration for well over 2 years, and I hope this will go on for many more than 2 years. But it's tough, and it's not as straightforward. And so I'd just be very interested in what the panel thinks they mean by collaboration and how that will really make a big difference.
One more question, then we'll start answering some of them. Lady in the blue jacket over there, her hand up.
Thank you. I've got just three quick points to make. My name's Jane Bryant. I'm Chief Executive of Artswork. First quick point. The best quality of arts practice, working with the best quality of artists and artistic practitioners, has instrumental value and will always have instrumental value. It's not one or the other, and we must advocate for that. Second point, we're not only experiencing economic cuts, we are experiencing intellectual and emotional cuts, as evidenced by the work of Michael Gove and the reframing of the curriculum, which we've spoken about earlier, which brings added challenge, if you like. And the third point, coming to Ivan Lewis, we have evidence. We have been collecting evidence. There is evidence in this room, all the projects, all the work with children, young people, about the value of the arts. We have that. What we are not good at is collating that, is using that to make the best arguments. And I'm not sure what's missing. But if the question is what needs to change, how would the panel advise us to better collate that evidence to make the arguments?
That was 3 points? Oh, very good. Well done. How economical. Now, who would like to start on and which one?
Can I take the last one?
Yes.
I mean, you're right, there's evidence, but the reality is that most of the evaluation work that's done across the arts and culture is post hoc evaluation, rather than the evaluation starting with the design stage of the project saying, what are the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve through this intervention? That's truth, so that's the first thing. The second thing that comes from that is you say, well, what could it look like? I can give you a very simple example, which is there's a challenge in the Henley Music Review. I'm surprised, actually, everybody didn't mention it this morning, which is to say that there is brilliant work going on from arts organisations across the country in terms of music education, but he slides this in, but actually quite often it feels that those projects are designed from the starting premises and interests of the arts organisation rather than the learning outcome that we might be defining as most important for the child involved in the exercise. So what it would look like is the arts sector saying, let's take the issue of some area of educational attainment. What are the outcomes that are educationally defined that we are trying to engage in with the curriculum that we are seeking to be creating? Then you would have full rigour in defining the artistic intervention that's designed to do that, and you would design the whole process of the evaluations built into it at the end. Then you would actually start to create the kinds of powerful cases that we're not reduced to just pulling all of them together and making the argument. They are powerful. I'm not trying to say you're not, but that's what would look different, and that's what the difference would feel like, in my view.
Jonathan, do you want to tackle that from a right-brain perspective? I mean, I'm seeking to keep the balance you've been enjoining on me. You know, measurement is not only in terms of the sort of thing that
Well, I absolutely agree with what John has just said. I think the point I was trying to make was that at a time when we have very hard and increasingly tangible evidence for a model of human intelligence, a model of human capacity that is actually being adopted by the most important elements of scientific discovery and research, we are still languishing behind in terms of the institutions and our modalities of applying that much more broadly into society. And that was the point I was trying to make. Actually, I wanted to talk about collaboration, but...
you can. You've got the microphone?
Okay. I think one of the things that staggered me when I came to the UK from Australia, given how small this country is physically in comparison to Australia, is how little the conversations, how rare the conversations are between institutions in London and the rest of the country, and conversations between different regions. I think when one talks about collaboration, one is talking about a very parochial set of conversations. There is collaboration in London, there's collaboration in the southeast, there's collaboration in Scotland, there's collaboration within a particular sector, within a particular environment. There is actually not collaboration at a distance. And I think the first thing to say, is that we need to practice it. I think actually that it needs genuine leadership, and I think a lot of people, I agree with this covenant between the strong and the weak. I think that's the place to start with collaboration. I also think it needs to acknowledge a symbiotic relationship that's not threatening. Collaborations are going to be better started between two organisations that do not initially perceive themselves to be in competition with each other. I think that's very important. And I think there's another dimension to this, which is you have to acknowledge that a second night or a second season is going to be better than a premiere. We are obsessed with being first, and I want to be obsessed with being second. Because I actually, and the Edinburgh Festival, since I've taken it over, has actually had a lot more collaboration where we want the out-of-town tryout. We want the show to come to us next. Partly because it's in the interests of the artists to do this, partly because we think we get a better show, but also we have to actually get over this absolute mania. It's worse in Europe than it is here, that actually a second night is a really great thing to have, because a second night is a sustainable night. A second night is in fact a continuation of an opportunity for an artist. And so I think those are some of the ideas that I think that are fundamental to us thinking about the transaction of collaboration and how we might do it.
Mark, should we stick with collaboration for a minute? As an individual artist, what kind of collaboration and with whom do you find helpful, useful in your work? Individual other artists, institutions, completely different people?
Well, institutions and... I mean, at the moment, I'm working on a project collaboratively with the National Gallery and the Royal Opera House, the Royal Ballet, to produce 3 short ballets, myself and 2 other artists working on that. And I'm also working with Wayne McGregor and Mark Anthony Turnage to create something new for Sadler as well. So this is all new to me, and it's incredibly exciting, rather daunting. But those are the kind of opportunities that, if you're allowed to stretch as an artist, they generate, exponentially. Those possibilities grow, and it's nothing I could have ever predicted a decade or so ago. And I think it's an incredibly good thing. I mean, I think artists have learned to deal with the pragmatics of earning a living, selling work to live, dealing with the public sector. Having to put on a kind of public face, so I think we are incredibly adaptive people now, as needs be, and I think actually in a way, the way artists have to kind of deal with all those things, and at the same time not be defensive or make too many justifications before the fact. That is actually not a bad model for how institutions can work and promote themselves.
Just as a matter of interest, where did the initiative for that collaboration with the Royal Ballet come from? Was it you? I want to work with dancers. Was it Wayne McGregor saying?
No, it was a curator at the National Gallery, and it centres around the 3 Titian paintings. Funny enough, we were talking about saving paintings for the nation earlier on, so this will be when hopefully they've raised the money for Diana and Callisto, then the 3 great Titian paintings will be the inspiration.
Thanks. Candace, which one do you want to pick up?
Again, on collaboration, because I'm not really qualified to talk about what the Arts Council is going to do, but to reinforce what I said previously is that we should think of the audience as a co-collaborator, a collaborator and co-conspirator at times. When you respect their fears, answer their questions, and include them, that is a collaboration which will keep you going because they'll keep coming, as opposed to looking at them as a wild beast or an indifferent beast or a sullen beast. It is part of the equation. It becomes more organic.
Well, my favourite definition of partnership is the mutual suppression of mutual loathing in the pursuit of government money. And I think those of you who've sat around various partnership boards over the years might understand the meaning of that, where it often is about ticking boxes which demonstrate people are working in partnership, and actually when you think about what you achieve, you scratch your heads collectively. But to give some tangible examples, I mean, back office functions. There must be room for collaboration and cooperation in terms of human resources, finance, back office generally. The point that was made about an offer to schools and the education system. If we are going to get to a situation where, because of national policy, there is going to be a real question mark about the role of art and culture within our education system, it would be fantastically powerful, I think, for arts organisations to come together and start offering educational institutions a package in terms of art and culture for their young people. I think the point that was made about philanthropy, I mean, frankly, you would be crazy not to support the notion that we want to increase philanthropic giving in our country. But you would also be incredibly naive if you didn't understand that that was really difficult for many organisations functioning outside London and many organisations functioning within London, within disadvantaged communities. It is kind of living on planet whatever. So it really needs, as has been suggested, some strong, clear leadership. And the other issue, I think, where we need collaboration, and we need a clear commitment from the stronger, and when I say stronger and weaker, I don't want people to get this wrong. As a consequence of cuts, that will be an inevitable reality. There will be stronger and weaker institutions. It seems to me that it's really important. There is a real danger. The first thing that will go is all that has been achieved over the last 15 years on access and participation, widening opportunities for parts of our community, our society, amongst young people, amongst older people, for whom previously art and culture was not of their world. There has been significant progress made over the last 10 or 15 years on that agenda, and it would be tragic if we were to use this cuts scenario to see all of that work thrown away. And therefore, I think it's really important that we have a focus on that too. And let me say one final thing. It was clear what happened. When the cuts were announced, the presentation of the cuts was that essentially for the national museums there would be a maximum of 15%. And that was far better than it might have been, that many people feared. And that then became, oh, well, the sector's actually not done too badly. We feared it would be so much worse. Well, actually, we shouldn't confuse what's happened in terms of the national museums, which for those organisations is still quite serious, with the scale of the cuts that is coming in terms of other organisations and other organisations who are not in a position to withstand 15%, 10% cuts, frankly. So it has to be collaboration for a purpose, not simply to go through the motions. And the lady at the back talked about evidence. I think you're right. There is lots of evidence around the system. The problem is the definition of the sector is not totally clear in the same way it is when you talk about health, education and crime. When we talk about art and culture, what does that mean? How can we bring that to life in terms of a public policy debate that puts art and culture alongside health, education and criminal justice? And how can we agree going forward? How can we try and reach agreement and resolve this tension between inherent and instrumentalism, institutional, and agree on a way of collecting evidence which doesn't allow other people to marginalise or dismiss that evidence, which forces them to face up to the fact that our evidence demonstrates that art and culture transforms our society both economically and socially. And I think what we need to think about going forward is, if we haven't been able to do that over the last decade, the last 15 years, that's been a missed opportunity. So how can we make sure in the future that we can do it in a way which enables us to win the argument?
Very challenging question. Any more questions? While the mic's getting to the gentleman in the front row here, and then a lady back there, and then a lady there, and then we'll be having to wrap up. One of the problems is that the parts of the arts that are kind of beyond numbering are very difficult to define. I think Prince Charles has the right answer. His slogan, when he sets out to persuade people, sometimes he uses other methods which are less persuasive, but his good slogan is "seeing is believing." And he takes groups of people who are sceptical about the value of good materials in building and things like that, and he takes them somewhere and he shows it to them. And actually there is no substitute for that. The trouble is that a generation of politicians come along, they are wheedled, corralled, welcomed to see and do things, and then they bloody well move over, and then new lot come in, you have to start all over again. Anyway, who's got the microphone? There you go.
There's John Hay Hawkins again. Talk about collaboration is one point, and the point also of evidence. There's the relationship, I believe, that between arts and health is massive. When you think that the Greeks used to build theatres alongside hospitals, it's not a new idea. And if you remember the Patch Adams film that Rob Williams in, I actually saw Patch Adams talk at a conference in Manchester about 12 years ago. He's completely outrageous. But he actually got people thinking about the benefits of art and health. And there is a mass of evidence about the benefits of art and health. And the collaboration should be between the arts and between the health service. And the health service should help to fund some of those arts that are highly beneficial. My big worry is now that the money is going to go down to the GPs, and who the heck are you going to persuade to give them an arts therapy instead of a Prozac pill?
Who is it next? Over there. Fast as you can, because we're running out of time.
Hi, I'm Rachel Billington. I'm the Director of Partners in Creative Learning. We deliver creative partnerships in Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. And one of the things that you guys have been talking about is leadership. And I'm gagging for a bit of leadership. I feel like I want to know where the leaders are going to come from. I feel like I want to know where I'm going to hear them. I feel like I want to know how I can get behind them. I actually feel like I want to know how I can be one of them. If we need leadership, then we need to see where the leaders are coming from, and we need to have some kind of rallying cry that makes us feel like getting out of our chairs and following. Thanks.
And who was the other person I mentioned? Who was the other question? There she is. We should have 2 mics, really, next time.
Hi, I'm Gillian Boddington. I'm Creative Director of Body Data Space. We're a collective and we work very much with collaboration. So I just wanted to put a couple of points leading on from what's been said. We work with inter-authorship, and we work a lot internationally with EU and Asian projects in what we call deep collaboration situations, which, as the lady at the front said, are not easy. There's a lot of learning to go on, a lot of work to do, and a lot of patience to do. The problem that we find in the UK terms is that quite often, as a small organisations, if you work with the larger, it's not collaboration, it's much more than assimilation. And you just disappear into that larger institution. And we're very aware in all our work of what we call the I-we syndrome. And I think it was mentioned on an earlier panel, the confusion that there is often between the I and having to put the I forward and in a particularly competitive environment, but the true we that there is in the depth of these things. So I wanted to try to make a point about fake collaborations and being very careful about the fake collaboration side. We work with technologies and we use them as integration of collaborations, And that was the second point, was to link into Evelyn's point about the technology side. I think we do need to move very strongly into a much more collective, collaborative vein with science, with academics, with the health education sector, all in together in an inter-authored situation. So that rather than reinventing the wheel, which we're often doing as the arts sector, but we actually become part of that evolving conversation, which is deeply collaborative in other industries, creative industries and other sectors. And we're working with Nesta on that at the moment. Just the final point is, maybe it's really worthwhile thinking about, but actually collective collaboration as a process is taught in Japanese primary schools now throughout Japan. And I think it's an essential one that we get on top of.
Thank you. 2 more questions and then I'll get the panel to sum up. There's a gentleman here and 3 people back there. That's 4 questions. I can add up. But I think if you're all very quick, we'll get all 4 in.
Very, very quickly, I think to begin with, the idea that's referred to as an English baccalaureate should be sued under the Trade Descriptions Act, because it's certainly not a baccalaureate. I confess I have a vested interest here. I'm a senior assessor for the International Baccalaureate, and the idea that education should be narrowed to a utilitarian view that shows a disrespect to the arts, where you have students who are keen to study the arts, and yet they are discouraged because they are told, don't do that because you'll need to get a proper job, study something else. So I think that the education structure does need to include the arts, as does the International Baccalaureate. And we are losing superb teachers from the UK who are going abroad to teach courses in countries that do respect the arts in a genuine manner. We are always facing this. This is a sideline. In the early 1900s, an Oxford Don dismissed the study of English literature as being a slightly inferior subject to study, only suitable for third-rate men and women. I hope that the arts don't go down that route.
Right, can we get the mic to the back right-hand corner and get as many of you in as we can? One of you could start talking if you've got a very loud voice. I know, we're nearly there, okay.
Thank you. Stephanie Sir, Nottingham Playhouse. 2 things. One is a plea, really, which is next time we have a conversation about collaboration, could the RSA send out something in advance to ask people for fantastic examples of collaboration? Because I spent the whole day listening to a world I don't recognise, I'm afraid. And I know many people in this room are handling the most enormous collaborations across their cities, across their regions, nationally, internationally. So it feels a little bit disingenuous to go, oh yes, collaboration, when so much of it is going on. Certainly in Nottingham, there are at least 5 major collaborations I could tell you about, which we could have given you examples of, and we're not unique. And the second thing is about back office, and people throw this into conversation. This happens with our local authorities. What do you think an HR department looks like in your average arts organisation? Please come and find out. You know.
Hi, my name's Matt Adams. I'm an artist with an artist group in Brighton called Blast Theory. And I wanted just to say, on the point about the Technology Strategy Board, that we, as a group of 6 artists, have been funded by the EPSRC, the AHRC, and the Technology Strategy Board. And I'm not saying that as an advert, but to say that I would be very happy to share our experience in doing that with anyone who's interested. I think there is enormous opportunities for artists and arts organisations to engage in a research agenda. The point I wanted to make about what needs to change is that during the last major recession, as budgets got squeezed, it's the artists who get squeezed most because they are at the last point on the chain. My suggestion for what might change would be that all arts organisations that are funded by the Arts Council publish how much money that they disperse actually goes to artists. I think it would be an interesting metric, and I would be very interested to hear what the panel thought of that possibility. Thank you.
There's one more there. there, and then I'll have to ask the panel to sum up.
Kate McGrath from Fuel. What needs to change? I'd like to ask Ivan Lewis why he started his comments by saying he's not from the arts world, and John Knell why, even after several years of helpfully putting a rocket up the arts sector, he uses you and not we to talk about it. Collaboration and advocacy begin at home. What is stopping you advocating for the arts as if you and it belongs at the centre of our civic life? And is it the same thing that stops other politicians and the wider public doing that too?
Sorry, I'm going to have to stop it there. John, do you want to... I'm going to ask each of the panellists just to say a last point. John, do you want to pick that one up?
Well, obviously I have to respond to the you and not we. Well, I don't know what the rite of passage and membership is to be defined a member of the arts sector, but I obviously haven't defined myself as having passed it. I've not run a cultural institution. I'm not an artist. I've never curated, I've never programmed, and I've never made a funding decision. Those all seem to me to be fairly good qualifications that you should probably treat some of what I say with a caveat emptor warning. In terms of two of the other comments that got said, I take the point completely at the back about there's lots of collaboration. I think the impetus of what I heard today, so it's a very important clarification, is that there's a debate about the depth of that collaboration, the clarity of its intent, is there common purpose driving it and its ambition, and therefore to end on the tech strategy board and the technology thing, I do think that on that, and to link it to the thing about where are the leaders, there are brilliant leaders in this room, and I know some of them, who are doing extraordinary work in the space of, and we've heard one about blast theory, in kind of digital and artistic practice. So here we go. Ed Vaizey declared how important it is today, but actually the position that we've seen from public funders on digital is effectively to say, the arts, there's a gold rush happening over that hill, but we won't give you the metaphorical wagons, horses, or saucepans to go and pan for the gold. So let's be really clear here that the role of big organisations, both arts organisations and funders, and it's in your comments from this morning, is to actually broker those bigger conversations between the arts and commercial sectors, people with the hardware and the software that you can use, and to say, where's your corporate giving and corporate investment in the creative digital infrastructure of the UK, and start with the arts organisations, not with broadband into people's homes. That's the kind of thing that I think I'm referring to.
Mark, what would you like to say by way of a closing shot?
I was at the last day of the Gauguin exhibition recently, and they couldn't have got any more people in with a shoehorn. I think the appetite for the arts in this country and the creativity of this country is incredible. And if we are not that, we are nothing. We are a small island, with a service economy, an oversized financial sector, and changeable weather. And it seems rather tragic that we always have to make the case over and over again. I mean, we are held up around the world as punching so far beyond our weight. We're the only other country apart from America that can do rock and roll. I mean, we've got everything going for us. We don't have to be so defensive,
Yeah, I just want to agree with Mark absolutely about that last point. I think the difference in the UK is that the appetite for the arts is something that we take very personally, and that we actually don't want to talk about it. I think it comes back to a comment that was made in one of the sessions about the way we frame the question. So I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about. It's just that we don't want to be considered to be in a position where we say we are supportive of the arts. We just get on and support it. I want to make another very final point, which is that in terms of collaboration, in terms of getting us into a mainstream position in the next couple of years, I'm talking, of course, about a very interesting coincidence that occurs to me at the Edinburgh Festival, but it should occur to all of you as well. In 2012, 20,000 journalists will be coming to the UK as part of the London Games. Not all of them will want to stay to the Paralympic Games, and not all of them will want to know what we do. But that if only 2,000 or 3,000 of them did that, that's still a huge pool of journalists where we can promote ourselves the length and breadth of the UK. I have an idea. One more night. It should be our collective ambition to suggest that everyone coming to the London Games spends one more night in the UK, not in London, and engages with one thing that we do. Because we've got an experience to sell. We've got a ticket to sell. And from the basis of that ticket in our communities, we've got a taxi ride, an airfare, a train ride, a restaurant. And if there's something that will focus the minds in this recession of people and will galvanise their support for us, it's actually that kind of hard-nosed response. We need help from central government to make that happen. We need a visitors program. We need connections with international governments. We need help to do this, but its multiplier effect for the UK would be hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. Let's get on with providing that one more night.
Brilliant idea.
Thanks very much. I'll take on the challenge about why I started my contribution by saying I'm not from the arts world, because I want to be honest. I don't want to be a politician who turns up to do a job and from day one speaks in a very authoritative way, although they've got all the answers and can propose all of the policies. And I've made it very clear since I got this job, I see it as threefold. First of all, to listen, then to learn, and then to provide leadership. And I think it's really important that you're straight with people in terms of beginning a new relationship. I already feel passionate about this sector. I already intend to be a champion, but I also want to be honest about the starting point, and I don't see anything wrong with that. In terms of Mark's point, I absolutely agree that this sector has nothing to be defensive about. But he also must be realistic. The number of colleagues who have come up to me and said, Ivan, it's a great job you've got. Have you got any tickets for the ballet or the football or the opera? Fantastic, they said. But you have no chance when you're arguing against cuts to education and to health and to policing and to universities. That is the standard conversation that I have with my colleagues and also many fellow citizens. So you have to understand that in terms of reflecting on, can that argument ever be won? And I am an optimist. I think we, not you, we can win that argument. But to win an argument, you've got to be realistic and honest about the starting point. I'd also like to say this. The gentleman talked about health. One of the biggest single problems that we've got in terms of government is that DCMS has not been a powerful voice across government to make the central case for arts' capacity to deliver on a whole range of public policy priorities. And a department that has now been reduced further by 50% will certainly be in no position to do that. As a minister who is responsible for social care and care of the elderly, and something I do feel incredibly passionate about, I saw what music and art did for people suffering with dementia. And what it did for their families when they saw the person that they love having the opportunity to participate in music and art. So you're absolutely right, whether it be health, whether it be crime, whether it be education, whether it be community cohesion, whether it be turning on some of the most alienated young people in our communities. Art and culture can be all powerful. But that is what we have to reflect on in terms of how we win this very profound, very fundamental argument going forward. And that requires us to be proud, but it also requires us to be realistic about the perception of the people who live in a world outside of the arts community. And I think that is very much the challenge for all of us, and I hope I can play a constructive role in meeting that challenge.
Well done. Candace.
I think at this point I start bringing into my American identity, and I look at the arts policy culture here. Look at all of you, and I think, wow, this is amazing. You have done so much. You know, you are so organized, and there have been, for a long time you were getting an amazing amount of investment. Things have changed, and what I'm hearing, and I'm an independent person. I work solo, etc. So I don't know, but what I'm hearing is people saying, "So now there's less money. So what do we do?" As opposed to thinking laterally, and thinking about what do we have and what can we do with what we have, and how, for example, in outside of London, where you really have small places with not very much money to begin with, and now are going to have even less, and need to do outreach. And you're worried also about making contacts with schools and so forth. And you have a feeling that the internet or computer stuff could help you. When you have sixth formers, you have people, I'm afraid I don't really know the grades, but 14-year-olds can come in and design websites and set up interactive things to bring people in of all ages. Many years ago, the CBSO Birmingham Orchestra started an offshoot called the Birmingham Contemporary Music Group. And new pieces of music were funded by micro-investors. A micro-investor can be a quid, 2 quid, that come together to help put on some kind of thing. But for that, again, it's bringing your public into your process. And I think that will help, as Phil Redmond said, when this time passes, when we get to another place, that people won't be questioning again whether or not it should be in the schools, whether it's significant to their lives, whether it's more important than health or dealing with crime and so forth. It will be one with the soul. And you have to remember that amidst all of the applications you make and all the conversations you have and the stabbing in the front and the back and the fabulous will to bring beauty into lives, to bring people in, because they can help you. They can really help you.
Another word? Yes. Another word. 2 words. Final point.
Second final thing, which is always a politician's weakness. The gentleman who asked about the narrowness of the curriculum and the consequences in terms of the jobs of the future. Can I make a point about this? The jobs of the future, in terms of this country's success, are going to be about creativity. They're going to be about art. They're going to be about innovation. They're going to be about the creative industries. And therefore, the narrowness of the curriculum is not just a mistake in terms of denying young people the opportunity to express their strengths and their skills in those spheres. It's a massive economic mistake in terms of this country's future success too.
Okay, that's the end of this session. Let me start by thanking everybody, not only people who've contributed to this session, but the whole day. I think really what people have been saying has been so thoughtful, focused, practical, unwhingy. It's a tough time for everybody, but it has been a remarkably reflective and intelligent conference. And I think one of the marks to me of a good conference is that as it comes to a close, a couple of 2 or 3 issues clarify in your mind, and you think, if we had another day, what I'd really like to focus on is this and this. And to me, what's emerged out of the talking we've been doing today, 2 things. One is that I've suddenly understood the argument about how holistic and important the whole arts, education, schools, higher education, the way things are changing, fits together. And I think maybe if we have a conference this time next year, we ought to maybe think about having it with an educational organisation, so we talk together about those things, because I think that is quite a profound question, a set of questions which aren't resolved yet. They're kind of floating in the air, and I think we need to get hold of them. And the second was really prompted by the conversation about collaboration, because a lot of sensible, practical, important things were said. But to me, I think we need to hitch up the idea of collaboration with the idea of digital technology and extend the notion of connectivity way beyond the back office sharing fundraising. It links to the notion that Candace was talking about the relationship with audiences and the question of what exactly a creativity in the arts is. Who is the author? Who is the audience? And I sometimes think that in another part of my life I spend in the media and talking to newspapers and with people worrying about the digital future of information. And I think, if I'm to judge from today, the conversation in the arts world is slightly less advanced than it is in the media, where ideas of the open as opposed to the open source as opposed to the closed issue is a burning argument going on in the media. Google versus Apple, The Guardian versus the Times, paywall versus open systems. And that goes absolutely profoundly to the nature of culture, the nature of creativity and transmission and receiving. And it actually helps to put the whole collaboration argument and the hitch up with digital technology in a different place. So that may be completely incoherent. You may not have understood a word I've said, which only illustrates that we may need to discuss it at greater length in another time. But that's enough from me. I would like now to thank our panel very, very much indeed for an extremely interesting and stimulating session. And thank you all.